You're listening to Hooked on Creek, a podcast celebrating the music, history, and fans of the legendary jam band Max Creek. I am your host, Corey Johnson, and this is episode 68.
She's coming your way, moving crazy to the beat. She's the girl, the kind you wanna meet. Say, hey lady, won't you look this way? You have no other, you'll be mine today.
Welcome back to Hooked on Creek. I have another very special episode lined up for you today, so thank you for joining me. Well, so much of what makes Max Creek special happens on the stage. Some of the most remarkable stories belong to the people standing just off of it. In this episode, I'm joined by Sally Ryder, lifelong fan of Max Creek, wife of bassist John Ryder, and the founder of Ryder Productions. Sally has been part of the Max Creek story for more than 5 decades, from driving through Connecticut snowstorms to see the band as a teenager, to building a family alongside the band as John Ryder's partner, to producing Camp Creeks and bringing the band's community together in ways that only she can. In our conversation, Sally talks about how she fell in love with John, the early days of touring and raising a family alongside the band, and what goes into producing a festival like Camp Creek. She also shares her memories of some of the band's most beloved venues, her perspective on what makes Max Creek so enduring, and her pride in watching her son Clayton carry the family's musical legacy forward. We also get into questions submitted by fans of Max Creek who wanted to hear directly from Sally. It was a lot of fun talking to Sally, and I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. All right, now let's get started. Sally Ryder, welcome to Hooked on Creek.
Well, thanks for having me, Corey. It's nice to be here.
Maybe the best place to begin is at the beginning. So tell me, how did you first meet John Ryder?
Well, I guess I imagine that would be the first question. I have to go back a little earlier than that, though, because I really fell in love with the music before I did the man. And what did that mean? It meant I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut, and we had snowstorms back in the day. And it didn't matter. When I was in high school, we drove everywhere to see Max Creek. And, so this is going back, I was 15. And my brother was 16, so he had the license, and he had the guys in the car, and I had the girls. So off we'd go, and we'd go see Max Creek. And, the Hartford Advocate was the paper back then, and that's how you kind of found out who was where and where they were playing. And so I fell in love with the band, very much so. And I took their music with me to college. I went down to University of South Florida, and there was quite a bit of Grateful Dead awareness there. But being down in Tampa, Florida, there wasn't a lot of Max Creek until I got there. And I completely turned on, anyone that would listen. It was either Bob Ware was being blasted, or it was John Ryder, Scott Morawski, Jerry Garcia, and a little bit of Pearl in there as well. So that's how that kind of all went. And I came back from college, and immediately we started going back and seeing Max Creek. And, we had friends that were friends of friends. So we kind of knew each other. Obviously, we had been going to shows all over. So it was easier for us to know them than to know us, right? I was at a Talking Heads concert, and John sat behind me. And then I heard something about he went to the health food store that I worked at and was looking for me. And that never happened. And then we were at Mohawk Mountain at a show, and John came off the stage, and he came out into the audience, and he came up and kept coming up and up and up the mountain. And he came up to me and said, hi. And he asked me out on a date. And I said, great. So we went out, and it was interesting, Corey, because we were like best friends. Talk, 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 talk. And we didn't really go out right after that. I think I just thought he was a really nice guy and a good friend. And then a friend of ours, Mark Gianfrido, he hooked us up on a blind date. And I think that's when that day I realized how a best friend is actually love. And we both realized very quickly that we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together.
Wow. So you mentioned your exposure first came through being a fan of Max Creek in high school. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Roughly what years was this, just to kind of put it in the context of the band's history?
I was going to shows in 75 and 76. We were hitting the old clubs, Rocking Horse, Pentangle Pub. We'd go to Mad Murphy's. I think later was the Lithuanian Hall. Those were really great shows. But of course, the In Place in Simsbury, that was one of our early haunts. So I know I was in there when I was 16, 17. Drinking age was 18. So they let the girls in or else the guys wouldn't stay, right? That's the way it went.
What was the reputation of Max Creek at that point in time in the mid to late 70s? What type of band were they? What type of fans showed up to their shows?
We were hippies. We definitely were. We were the beads, we were the long dresses, they were the long hair. They were older than we were, and we kind of looked at them as, I think, just the music of our day. They were, I don't know, they were the cool guys and they were the best music. There was no doubt in our mind, we'd go around to everything, but Max Creek was kind of a place where you ran into people that you knew, that you wanted to know, and that you wanted to spend more time with.
At some point in time, as your relationship with John grew, your relationship with Max Creek must have grown too. So talk about your connection to the band or your relationship with the band Max Creek as you were, dating John and forming that relationship with him.
Interestingly enough, he had tried to find me. He had before he came out off the stage, he had tried to find me. He heard I was managing a health food store somewhere, and I was, and he never found it. But long and short of it was, Rob Freed, and his twin Gary, and his parents, his dad especially, they had a health food store in Simsbury. Well, I ended up buying it. So I kept on that Freed piece of the band, and we spent a lot of time over at Rob's house when we were dating, no question about it. He lived in Simsbury, and here I was taking over the family business with the health food store. And John and Scott are brothers, and that just all fell into place. We've just been a family since day one.
What did it take for Max Creek to be successful, maybe in the late 70s or the 80s? Because as I understand it, in the 80s, they started really touring a lot. They had a lot of shows every week, every month, every year. And what were you seeing from your perspective, close to John and as a fan of the band? What did it take for Max Creek to do that?
They loved it. They were happy to be on the road. Again, my relationship with John was such that I had the health food store, and, so I was busy in my own life, and, we had Sundays off. It got a little trickier after we got married and I had all these babies. And then he was gone Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. That became a lot more. And I would say that the family got even deeper in ways that people would never realize. I mean, people like Bobby Harris. He would always come over and make sure that I was okay, and snowstorms, and John would be in Rochester, and he'd bring in wood, and he'd visit with me, and we'd spend a lot of time together. And that was just kind of the way he was. And that's kind of how the whole, Max Creek family kind of was. They were kind of just always there for each other. We always have been.
You and John ultimately got married, and you have 3 kids. Is that right?
We do. We have 3 boys. We got married in my parents' backyard. My mother loved John Ryder more than myself. She loved him.
What did she like about him?
I remember the first time John walking into my family's home to meet my parents, and there were a bunch of people over that day. So there was only one chair left in this big room that in the back of their house, the family room. And it was the chair where his back was going to face my mother and my father. And he sits down and the long hair, and they were just like, oh God, here's Sally with another one of these boyfriends, right? And by the end of the day, my mother was talking music and opera, symphony, and she and John could talk about their passion for music all day long. My mother adored John Ryder, and she adored our children. So again, we dated for 7 years. So towards the end, my mother made a point to always have John's family join our family for holidays. So, because his sister lived in Boston and they were down south. So we were somewhere in the middle. So by the time we got married, our wedding, everybody knew each other on both sides of the family.
A lot of people might know you, Sally, also through Ryder Productions. Do you want to take a moment to explain what Ryder Productions is and sort of how that fits into your life?
I sold the health food store. I decided to go into the corporate world. I started a 10-year career with Fleet Bank, and I became their event planner, an event coordinator for 7 states. They were one of the largest banks in the country. So I was kind of all over, and I was doing these events. At one point, I remember bringing John in because he had started this Video Rider Productions, and he was doing video work, and I'd bring him in, and he would have him video my events. And I remember having to tell my boss, hey, by the way, it's my husband, and he said, well, okay, even better. And I said, okay, great. So I did that for 10 years, but then Bank of America bought Fleet, and they wanted to move me down south. I didn't want to do that with the babies. I didn't want to leave my family, my parents, my brothers and sisters, and all of my friends that were up here when I had babies. And so I decided to start my own company. And I dove out, and that was in 2004. And I started Ryder Productions, and just been riding that train ever since. It's, I've produced all kinds of corporate events and conferences, and obviously people that may know me, they know that I produce festivals, Camp Creek and whatnot. So we still do it to this day, and it's an international company. We are all over the world with our clients, and we're also international travel agents. So we manage corporate and personal travel all over the world, which is a lot of fun because John and I travel quite a bit now.
Is John Ryder on stage different than John Ryder at home versus John Ryder at work? Are these 3 different people, or are they all pretty much the same guy?
They're pretty much the same guy. John Ryder's a cool cat, right? He's a very thoughtful, patient, mindful person, and he never loses track of that. So whether you see him on stage being, his jumping up and down self at times, you're not going to see that in the corporate arena, but you do see this very level-headed person who can pretty much fix anything that goes wrong technically or otherwise. So, and at home, John is such an amazing father. He's got a wealth of information that he has taught to his boys. And it started with Scouts. John's father was a Silver Beaver. John was an Eagle Scout, is an Eagle Scout. And his boys loved being out and camping and hiking and knots and sailing and anything to do with the outside world. And I'm happy to say they all still adore that. It's a huge part of their life. But as they got older, then they got into the music, and then they got into the company and how to run sound equipment and editing equipment and video and lights. And, all of a sudden they were interested in production with little bits of this, that, and the other. I feel like he has just been the most amazing father. He's a calm, loving force. And we just adore him. And, John and I are so proud of our three boys. Grattan is just a super people person. He knows everybody. He grew up with everybody, and he stays friends with everyone that was his elders, but now are his friends. He is our sound engineer for the company and does an amazing job. Tristan is our lighting director. He is incredibly talented with lighting. But behind the scenes, he manages everything, all of our equipment for Rider Productions, and just maintains it and forces me to buy new equipment all the time, which I know he's right, but I have the purse strings. So Tristan is just the backbone of the company in that way. And Clayton, he comes on the road with Rider Productions, and he does a little of everything. And therefore, he knows a little about everything. So that's a wealth of comfort to have that as well.
From your perspective, what was it like for your children to see their father up on stage? Was that interesting for them, or was that difficult for them to understand who John Rider is on stage versus their dad?
Well, they never knew anything different, because when they were little fellas, first off, John held every one of them up on stage like the Lion King when they were born. So they literally grew up holding on and sitting, at his feet, holding on to the microphone stand, and then, taking naps on the side of the stage, sitting on my lap over on the side of the stage. So they never knew any different. Those that were elders have become friends to them. And now they're just part of the big family because, of course, Max Creek is about, now it's our kids and our grandkids and, the generations have gone on and on. So they never really thought of John as anything other than their father and the guy up there that plays bass.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about John. How have you gotten to know other members of the band?
Well, Corey, I've had the opportunity to kind of know everybody at some point, really. You have to kind of go back to the days when we had John Archer doing sound and Linda Canoyer doing lights. Arch was a funny guy to be on the road with. A lot of great times with Arch, and of course he was very artistic, and he did a lot of the artwork that's in that for the band. So there's all that. And of course, then on stage, drummers. Bob Goslin, one of the funniest men you ever wanted to meet. We had great, great times with Bob. And then going into, we had Greg DeGigliamo, we had Greg Vasso, a lot of great times with those guys. Clearly sad to see both of them go. And we also had the drummer Scott Allshouse. Became very good friends with his wife as well. They live in Granby, so we still get to see each other now and again. Another drummer that we lost, but again, moved on to greater things, and I understand all that. Of course, we now have Bill Carbone and Jay, who's part of my family. He spends a lot of time sleeping over our house or on vacation with us, and he's just become so close to my family and my boys and whatnot. And then, of course, I haven't talked about Mark Mercier, who is such a staple of the band and one of my closest people in the world. I feel like Mark would do anything for myself and John, and he's just the kindest person. I think he actually, along with Joe Ryan, played the wedding march when John and I got married. So, I've always had such a great, great friendship in Mark Mercier.
Well, Sally, my first exposure to you, if my memory is correct, was at Camp Creek in 2021. It was my first trip out to see Max Creek, and I remember driving into, it was Odetta Camping Resort, up to the entrance, and I remember you saying, "Oh, look, Corey's here, I'm so happy," or something like that. And I don't think you know how much that meant to me, to have somebody welcome me and to have you welcome me. It meant a lot to me, and that was the beginning of an incredibly magical weekend. And of course, I came back to Camp Creek the next year too. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of all the fans for putting on Camp Creek and putting on these special experiences. They're just incredible. So thank you.
Well, you know what? You dove right in and with heart and soul, and you weren't trying to take over anybody else's role or be somebody you weren't. You were just a passionate person that wanted to be involved. So how can we not have open arms to that kind of thing? So you know what, you're still welcome, and everybody's welcomed you with open arms by this point.
Well, one of the things I remember at that Camp Creek in 2021 and then following year in 2022 is being exposed to different artists on the lineup, right? At each of those Camp Creeks, including different female artists I had not heard of. And I'm curious from your perspective, what goes into choosing who should play at Camp Creek? And were you intentional in finding female artists to be on stage?
Well, that directly goes to the second year because the first year that we were at Odita, I ended up with all kinds of male bands, this, that, and the other, and there was maybe a spattering and whatnot. So was it intentional when I chose those bands? You bet it was. I did a lot of homework. I had help from people like Bill Carbone. I certainly had help from my kids because they had kind of the pulse of the market and they're out and about, whatnot. I really fell in love with Michaela Davis, Karina Reichman, and who else did I have? Someone else on that lineup.
This Melt was a really good one. I like that.
It was Melt, of course. I spoke to all of their agents and I put out an offer to all of them. And unbeknownst to me, it turns out they all knew each other, those women. They had gone to school together. They had spent time in New York together, and they all said yes. So I ended up with an amazing lineup, and I think it turned people on to some very cool music there.
Very much so. Can you speak a little bit about the behind the scenes of an event like that? I mean, I saw a lot of people doing some amazing work to make the experience friendly, the resort clean, and just to have the best time possible for Max Creek fans and those who brought their family. But I know there's a lot of work that we don't see, right? How would you describe the amount of work that goes into putting on an event like that?
Well, I kind of knew when I found Odita, I had been looking and I'd gone to a number of places, all different states. And when I found Odita, I knew it was where I wanted to be. I knew I had to fix up that beach. I knew I had to bring in a stage, all that kind of thing. But it was already a pristine, park. And the thing about it was that they had folks that moved in and lived there all summer long. So they were very proud and respectful of what they already had. And it just so happened that the owner was a huge fan of Max Creek. So like he didn't know how his folks were going to react to the band. But then when we got on site, the respect that our fan base brought to that campground was beyond belief. Nobody left a paper cup. It was left better than when we found it. So no matter what I brought in and what we did and how we advanced it, I can't speak high enough for, again, our fan base for leaving Odita more beautiful when we left after a massive festival. So, it was a little bit of everybody was involved in all that. But sure, it was a lot behind the scenes. Sure.
Well, Sally, in preparation for my conversation with you, I had fans of Max Creek submit questions to me that they wanted me to ask you. So the first here is from Dave Bonin. He wants to know, how many times have you been to Max Creek, Virginia?
Oh, Dave. So a number of times, many, many times. John's family's from down there. So we would always go down in the summer and we would spend time. And we would always go to Max Creek. And John's an Eagle Scout. So we would go where his early scouting days were. We fell in love with a house that was in Max Creek, came very close to buying it. It just didn't make sense. So we didn't, but that's where his family's from. I mean, that's where I met everybody. That's where his grandmother fell in love with me. Wear yellow, you'll catch a fella, she says to me when I had a pretty yellow top on. That's where I got to know, that little boy and who he was and how he was brought up. So many times, Dave, many times.
Christina Ryan wants to know your favorite Max Creek song.
Oh, I guess I thought that was going to probably come around. You know, I can't probably pin one. Obviously Wild Side is in there, but July Woman that, John sang for me at our wedding. So, there's too many to really say, but that's a hard one.
Yeah. Well, I would like to know, did John write Wild Side about you?
Well, you'll have to ask John.
Right.
I think when she swings her yellow hair, I think it kind of gives it away.
Yeah. Don Bean wants you to describe what it was like to see Max Creek in the 1980s.
Late 80s, early 90s, it was pre-kids, and the band was on the road. And, we had a nice crew and trucks, and off we went. And we stayed in all kinds of crazy band houses and condos and this, that, and the other. I mean, Nantucket, favorite times out there for sure. In those band houses, I mean, people would be sleeping in closets and we didn't care. It was fine, it just didn't matter. But, the days out to Colorado obviously were such fun. And going to all the Camp Creeks early on, we enjoyed what we were doing. We felt free. Just a lot of good people making a lot of good music.
James McClellan wants to hear your perspective on how Max Creek was able to balance their touring schedule in the early days with family and life outside of music.
So it was a lot. It was a lot, no question. We would bring our kids on the road. So many times, you would find our babies underneath soundboards, underneath Linda's lighting board. We'd tuck them under there. And more often than not, there were pack and plays on both sides of the stage. So we had our kids with us. And when we didn't, we didn't. The guys went out and they did their thing. And they came home, they got some sleep, caught up. And why did they go on the road and do what they love? Because they wanted to come home to their families. We all had kids around the same time, and our kids loved being at Max Creek. They have great memories of Camp Creeks. They have great memories of times like Block Island. I remember, I think it was the Atlantic. And we had, the kids were like, I don't know, they were, we had Linda's son, Jason, with us, and a bunch of kids. And the staff at the Atlantic saw these kids and they were like, what are we going to do? They went to the back, they came up with boxes, and they made this whole trail where the kids went up and down the hill all day long, sliding on these boxes. And, it just became a thing where everybody kind of expected the kids to be there. Meanwhile, I was backstage with Linda and Amy Kerrigan shooting spitballs at the band. I mean, we had fun when the kids were around. We had a good time. We balanced it. We made it work.
Daniel Bowser wants to know if we can expect another Camp Creek in the future.
It's never a no. It's never a no. If the time is right, maybe so.
Your son Clayton is also a musician. What is it like for you to watch him carry forward the family's heritage?
It's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And I've been seeing him perform, since he was young. He started playing with John and singing with John in church, many moons ago. And I still enjoy that so on Easter morning when they perform at church together. So there's nothing more special in my heart to see that. But the other thing about it is when he's performing, then I've got Grattan and Tristan, who have set up the sound and his mic, and they're there too. Whether Clayton's on the stage alone or not, we're all there around him. But his music, he graduated summa cum laude from Berklee College of Music. I'm incredibly proud of him. He's very talented. And he's got a lot going on that the public will probably hear soon, but he's always in studio working. And he does have his own flair of music, and it is exciting. Yeah.
Well, I heard a recording of him performing with Max Creek. I think it was July 4th, 2021. He stepped up on stage with Max Creek. I think this was the Sunset Concert Series. That was at Salmon Brook Park in Granby, Connecticut. I'm just curious what it must be like to see your son and your husband in Max Creek. Because like you said, you were a fan of Max Creek in high school, and here you are now this many years later. What was that like to see them together performing?
It's totally kick-ass because, he's a guitarist, so he's up there like, with Scott, and they are having such a good time. It's gotten only better and better, and I like it when Scott looks over on the side of the stage and he gives me those eyes like, shit, this kid's good, So, I love that they're having a good time together. I love that they can play together so comfortably. He's jumped up on stage a few times. I remember way back when at Camp Creek in New York, where Clayton had written a song, and the guys came over to our trailer for a rehearsal, and they rehearsed it, and then they gave him feedback, and he wrote an extra verse, and they kind of wrote a little piece together, and he performed it. And he was a teenager; he was not in college, so they've all been really encouraging, and I love it. I love it so much.
You must have seen Max Creek at so many different types of venues, locations, crowds. And I'm curious from your perspective, what makes a good Max Creek show?
Well, I guess part of the reason that I wanted to do Camp Creek and Sunset Concert Series and things like that is outside. I like music outside. I do like to be, dancing in a field. I think that there's just nothing more special about people being in a field together with the music they love, the people they love, the food that they've, nurtured and taken care of to bring, special if they grew these berries or whatever it all is. And so to me, my favorite, Max Creek outside.
It sounds like you like outdoor venues, but what were some of your favorite indoor venues to see Max Creek?
I guess we have to go back to the Agora. The Agora Ballroom was just a launch pad of crazy fun for many, 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 many times. We had a great relationship with the owners there. I actually ran the ticket office. I managed the money behind the scenes for those shows. I remember many the night with a gun on the desk. It was serious. It was cash back then. There were no credit cards, and we had big crowds, and we had a lot of fun at the Agora Ballroom is a highlight of, which goes back to one of those other questions about the 80s, but the Agora Ballroom was a real special place. One other venue that has always been a fan favorite and that we loved as well was Eastover. And I know my son Clayton, one of his early memories would be from there. The Morawskis and the Riders, we shared a house on the property, kind of over on the back side of the bison field. So the kids had to walk by these huge bison every time we went up to stage and back. And I remember Clayton wearing his Hagar the Horrible helmet, this hat that he had, and it had horns on it. And the bison would come over like they thought he was like part of the family. But that was a cool place. Everybody had rooms that were all around each other, being in the inn or out in the back. But we all ate together. All of our meals. So it was all the band, all the crew, all the fans, all the staff, and we had all our meals together. There were shows that were inside at night, but then they were outside the back during the day. So everybody was happy, and there was a lot of music all weekend long. Eastover was a really great spot.
Sally, Max Creek, in my opinion, stands out as one of the most enduring bands in the jam band landscape. And you've had a front row seat to so much of the band's history. What do you think makes Max Creek so special and unique?
They let each other be who they are. They give each other the respect and the time on stage to flourish and navigate and experience different sounds and flows and rhythms. And I think it's just all about respecting each musician, and they've each had it. Nobody's trying to be the big shot, the big guy. It's never been like that. It's always just an equal share of camaraderie on the stage with an enormous amount of talent.
Sally Ryder, I had a lot of fun talking with you. Thank you so much for joining me on the Hooked on Creek podcast.
This was fun, Corey. You're the best. Thank you so much for everything that you have done over these many years, supporting the band, getting the word out, telling the stories, and I'm glad to have been able to have some time with you. Just great.
Big thanks to Sally Ryder for joining me on the podcast and sharing her unique perspective on Max Creek. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. If you are curious, this episode featured clips of Max Creek performing the song Wild Side live at Eastover Resort in Lenox, Massachusetts back on April 26, 2003. That concludes episode 68 of Hooked on Creek. If you have feedback about this episode, please visit hookedoncreek.com and click the contact link to send me a message. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in.